B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Yoma Daf Nun Aleph. We're going to start 9 lines from the top of the Amud. And this takes us back to what we saw on Daf Nun Amud Aleph. On Daf Nun Amud Aleph, we found that a Tanakama were quoted as saying that there's a general rule: any korban tzibur overrides Shabbos and Tumah. A korban yochid does not override Shabbos or Tumah. Rabbi Meir brought a list of korban yochids that do override Shabbos and Tumah, and Rabbi Yaakov brought a list of korban tziburs that do not override Shabbos and Tumah. And if we take a closer look at the two lists, we'll see that Rabbi Meir, he mentioned the korban Pesach amongst his list of korban yochids that override Shabbos and Tumah. Rabbi Yaakov mentioned the korban chagiga that was brought on Yom Tov, that as being a korban of a rabbim, of a tzibur, that does not override Shabbos and Tumah. And the Gemara is going to discuss that. Omale Rav Huna b'reid Rav Yeshua l'Rava. The Tana, these Tanoim, or this brisa that brings the questions that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yaakov asked against the Chachamim, Ma'ishno Pesach dekori le korban yochid. Why is the korban Pesach considered a korban yochid, or Ma'ishno Chagiga dekori le korban tzibur? And the korban Chagiga is considered a korban tzibur. What would be the difference between them? Imishum da'osi beknufia. Are you going to say that a korban chagiga is called a korban tzibur because it's brought when there was aliyah l'regel, when all of Klal Yisrael were there together as a very large group? Pesach nami also beknufia. Korban Pesach was also brought with aliyah l'regel, with all of Klal Yisrael there. So why should that not be a korban tzibur? Answers the Gemara, because when Rabbi Meir mentioned Korban Pesach, he was not just referring to the Pesach Rishon, he was also referring to Pesach Sheni, Ika Pesach Sheni, the second Pesach that was brought on the 14th of Iyar. That was brought by individuals, it was not brought by Beknufia, it was not brought in a big crowd, it wasn't brought with a lot of people together, and therefore Korban Pesach is considered a Korban Yochid. Omarle, if so, if we're assuming that when Rabbi Meir speaks about Korban Pesach, he means the Korban Pesach Sheni, Imkain, Yehei Doiches HaShabbos VeSatumah. Because what did Rabbi Meir say? Rabbi Meir's question against the Chachamim were that we have a Korban Yochid, namely Korban Pesach, which is overriding Shabbos and Tumah. And so if we're right, or assuming that Rabbi Meir, who mentions Korban Pesach as being a Korban Yochid, is talking about Pesach Sheni, then we would have a clear proof here from Rabbi Meir that Pesach Sheni overrides Shabbos and Tumah. And that's contrary to what we saw just a couple of lines above where we started today, where the Gemara says that Pesach Sheni is not Doicha Tumah. And here we have Rabbi Meir saying that it does override Tumah and it's considered a Korban Yochid because it's referring to Korban of the Pesach Sheni. Answers the Gemara, Omar Lei. Yes, Rabbi Meir holds Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir holds like Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar Dochi. Rabbi Yehuda says that even Pesach Sheni overrides Shabbos and Tumah. And the Tana that we mentioned before that says that it does not override Tumah is the Tana that argues with Rabbi Yehuda. The Tana, because we learned in a Brisa, Pesach Sheni doiches HaShabbos ve'eino doiches HaTumah. The Tanakama hold, as we saw in the previous Gemara, that Pesach Sheni does not override Tumah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and as we saw now that Rabbi Meir is going to follow that Rabbi Yehuda holds after doiches HaTumah. It also overrides Tumah. Asks the Gemara, "My Tama the Tanakama. What would be the source of the Tanakama that Pesach Sheni should yes override Shabbos and should not override Tumah?" Omar Lachom, Mipnei Tumah d'chiyasei v'yaseh b'Tumah. The only reason that this person is doing Pesach Sheni is because he was Tomei in the first Pesach. So it was Tumah that pushed him away from the first Pesach. We're going to say do it the second Pesach b'Tumah. Rabbi Yehuda. What's Rabbi Yehuda going to say to that? Rabbi Yehuda says that Pesach Sheni is Doicha Tumah. How can that be? If it's Doicha Tumah, he could have done the first Korban Pesach, in the first Pesach. Omar L'chor, Rabbi Yehuda will tell you, Omar Kro. It says in the Pasuk, K'chol chukas ha-Pesach yaseh. Oisoi, the Pesach Sheni is done with the same rules as Pesach Rishon. V'afilu b'Tumah. And even B'tumah, like in Pesach Rishon, there are some cases where it's done B'tumah and other cases where it's not done B'tumah. And those cases where it's not done B'tumah, the people who are Tomei, they get pushed to the Pesach Sheni to do the Korban Pesach. And Pesach Sheni also, it can be done B'tara and it can also be done B'tumah. If the people doing Pesach Sheni are Tomei, they can do the Pesach Sheni B'tumah. This person was Tomei in the first Pesach Rishon, and the Torah wanted him to do Korban Pesach in a Tahor state. So the Torah says, wait till Pesach Sheni, do it then. Lo zocha. If he didn't merit being Tahor then as well, Yasenu B'tumah. He has no choice and he'll do the Pesach Sheni B'tumah. That will be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Continues the Gemara. And this Gemara is now taking us back to the Gemara that we saw on Daf Nun Amud Beis. We saw at the top of Daf Nun Amud Beis that Rabbi Elazar had a question, had a doubt, according to Rabbi Meir, who says that a par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is a Korban Yachid. Is it Oiseh Tmura? Is it not Oiseh Tmura? And the Gemara explained what was the depth of the question, that even though it belonged and was paid for by the Kohen Gadol, do we say that normally what happens is when Reuven buys a korban and Shimon gets it, and it's used to atone for Shimon, Reuven is giving over, so to speak, part of the ownership of the korban to Shimon to act as an atonement for him. Over here, all the other Kohanim are getting atoned from this bull. The question is, who does the animal actually belong to? Do we say that it's as if the Kohen Gadol gave it to them and they now have a type of a shared ownership in it, and then it's considered like shutfim and it doesn't do Tmura? There's the halachas of Tmura do not apply. Or no, do we say that the only one who intrinsically gets atoned by it is the Kohen Gadol? Then by the way, the other Kohanim also get atoned by it, but it's not as if they actually have a share in it. That was the question that Rabbi Elazar posed. And now the Gemara is going to address that. V'teipikle, why don't we bring proof from Psukim that the other Kohanim have absolutely no share in the ownership of the Korban Pesach? Because we're going to see now in the Psukim that the word Asher Loi, the bull, the par Asher Loi, belongs to the Kohen Gadol exclusively, is mentioned 3 times. Because the Asher Loi, Omar Achmona, it says in the Pasuk, Mishaloi Hu Mevi, that the bull is exclusively belonging to the Kohen Gadol, and therefore it's considered the Korban Yachid. The other Kohanim have no share in it whatsoever, and therefore we're asking, why is Rabbi Elazar even doubting it? Of course it's a Korban Yachid, and of course the halachas of Tmura should apply. To Tanya, because we saw in a Brisa, it says in one of the Psukim, in the Pasuk Vav, V'hikriv Aaron es para chatos asher loi. He offers up the bull of the chatos which is his, v'chiper ba'adei ba'ad beisai. It atones for him and his family. Says the Brisa, asher loi mishaloi hu mevi. He has to pay for it. It has to belong to him. V'loi mishal tzibur. He's not allowed to buy this bull with the money of the belonging to the tzibur. Maybe the Pasuk is trying to impress on us that he cannot take money from the general tzibur because she'einat tzibur miskaprim boy, because this bull is not atoning for the general tzibur. But maybe he can pay for it with the money belonging to the other koyanim, because we know that the second vidui that the Kohen Gadol said on this bull atoned for the koyanim. Talmud Loima, that's why it says in a few psukim later, in Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'hikriv Aaron es parachatos asher loi, v'chiper ba'adei uvad beisai. It says it again. Yochel, says the Brisa, I may have thought, lo yovi, that indeed he should pay for himself. That's lekatchila. However, v'imhevi kosher. If, however, the other kohanim did pay for the bull, it would be kosher. Talmud Loi Mashuv, it says again in that same pasuk, V'shochates parachatos asher loi. Shina kosov la'akev, olav la'akev, and this is an old rule that every time the pasuk says something twice, then it's coming to teach us that it's essential, it's ma'akev. So not only is the money of the tzibur not allowed to pay for it, not only is the money of the other kohanim not allowed to pay for it, it must belong exclusively to the Kohen Gadol. So you should find proof from this Brisa that, of course, it belongs just to the Kohen Gadol, and the halachas of Tmura should apply. What was Rabbi Elazar's discussion? So the Gemara, before coming directly to refute this, or to answer this, the Gemara is saying, you're right. Let's assume that the way you've understood it is completely accurate, that this bull must belong exclusively to the Kohen Gadol, not to anyone else. The other Kohanim, if they do not have any share in this korban, then how indeed are they being atoned for it? What association do the other Kohanim have with this korban? If you're saying that it must belong only to him and no share to the other Kohanim, how are they being atoned? That regarding the treasures, the value, the money of Aaron, of the Kohen Gadol, is different. That we have to say that even though Aaron HaKohen, the Kohen Gadol, he's the one who paid for it and no one else was allowed to have any share in paying for it, nonetheless the Torah, so to speak, was mafkir. He reckoned that animal as being, so to speak, ownerless, in as much as that other Kohanim could become annexed to it and get their kapora. So maybe also hochigab tmura, maybe the same would apply regarding the halachas of tmura. That nami, that shani begaza da'arin da'afkir rachmona gabe echov ha'kohanim. That in the same way as the Torah must have allowed the kohanim to have some type of ownership on this, even though they don't have a financial ownership in as much as they were not allowed to be part of the payment of it, but it must have been associated to them and belong to them in as much as they can be atoned by it. So maybe this affects the halachas of Tmura as well, that it's considered as if the animal belongs to more than one person and there will be no halachas of Tmura. And that was Rabbi Elazar's question, and there's no reason to refute it from the Brisa. And in the next Shiur, we're going to continue the next Mishnah.